warm welcome to our studio guests today and to the fellow travelers out in cyberspace, thanks to that non-stop stream of zeros and ones. My name is Peter Gobets, co-founder of the Zero Project and moderator of the International Conference/Workshop on Zero. The Zero Project is a three-stage affair. There's a book project, there's this associated online event, and there's the in-depth research program to follow. But today, session number 5. We welcome yet another contributor to the monograph on Zero book project and special guest, Professor Parthasarathi Mukhopadhyay, Ramakrishna Mission Residential College at Narendrapur, autonomous under the University of Kolkata in India. He will appear in a later session to present and discuss his own article contribution to the monograph, but today Partha attends this session to introduce the world premiere of the documentary on the bilingual panel exhibition that he produced that spans the entire history of Zero from ancient times to the present. The documentary will also be entered into the Kolkata Film Festival this January. So it is, we take this opportunity to express our sincere thanks for his consideration in granting the Zero Project this exclusive screening. We welcome as panelists today Dr. Marina Wil, who was here last week's session, and Dr. Victor van Bijlert, who has been a panelist in an earlier session. We would be keen to hear the first impressions on viewing the documentary. So we hope to see you all back in about 40 minutes. If Partha would now please introduce your documentary.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter, for this kind introduction, and thanks for giving me this opportunity of showcasing this work on Zero. This documentary, Genesis of Zero, here what I have tried is to showcase all the present claims and counterclaims regarding the genesis of this idea and the number Zero, without any prejudice or bias to any specific civilization. We have tried to institute what is called a Zero Gallery in our institution, in our college, where we try to showcase the 5,000 years of human history across all the ancient civilization, starting from the Egyptians, Babylonians, Mayans, Greece, and coming to India, then Arabs, and all the others. The endeavor was to try and present the present state of affairs regarding the claims and counterclaims of the origin of this number Zero, which usually is accepted to have been discovered at some early period in India, though that claim is also contested. So with an open mind, our objective is to showcase and present all the available known aspects of this history of the origin of Zero. And I believe the documentary will do some justice to that. Thank you very much. It's a 40 minutes documentary. I request you to watch carefully, and I believe that you will love it.
Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Ramakrishna Mission Residential College, Autonomous Narendrapur, is a premier institution of higher learning. Established in 1960, the college has traversed a long way of 60 years and is now celebrating its Diamond Jubilee. This college has been established to nurture the epoch-making educational ideology preached by Swami Vivekananda The Department of Mathematics does not only offer an honors undergraduate program, but the faculties of this department are also engaged in higher research in mathematics. Professor Parthasarathi Mukhopadhyay, Associate Professor of this department, has been researching on the origin of zero for almost 2 decades. And this research is certainly a pride point of this institute. In collaboration of the BITM, the Department of Mathematics and the college as well has established a panel exhibition based on the research activities of Professor Parthasarathi Mukhopadhyay. We certainly hope that Professor Mukhopadhyay's long-time research will be able to generate new debates, new arguments, new horizons in this field of zero research.
Zero. No single mathematical creation has ever been more potent for the general on-go of intelligence and power. But in which culture did zero originate? Well, interestingly, there is no one-liner as an answer. And any attempted answer generally depends on the perception of the seeker, as the connotation of the word zero can be perceived in several different but interconnected perspectives. Many ancient civilizations have their own different version of nothingness, represented by various zero-like concepts. But except in India, nowhere else these early and somewhat hesitant concepts bloom into their full potential as a number in its own right. Zero has always been with us from the ancient times. Although its somber discourse differed across paradigms, all recorded avatars of zero, dissimilar in rank and role, are gathered here in this hall to help you take a stroll through the winding roads of history to the bend of the recent past, when Indian zero gets accepted by all as a mathematical first. In this engaging tour of pictorial history, the journey takes us through the Egyptian hieroglyphs, Inca quipu, Babylonian clay tablets, Mayan glyphs, followed by the great Greek civilization, the mighty Roman Empire in the West, whereas we also come across the Chinese rod numerals, the lofty philosophy embracing the concept of nothingness by the ancient Indian seers, which gradually paved the path for emancipation of zero as a number in its own right, till the Arabs in the East, and through them it went to Europe. Touching all these cornerstones, this bilingual panel exhibition tries to place the true genesis of our modern zero in its proper footing, an ode to nothing that is. Egypt, the land of Nile, once it cradled one of the earliest human civilizations. Their pyramids, the burial chamber of their pharaohs, those attest to their unbelievable engineering skill. The hieroglyphic enumerations, that was decimal but additive in nature. That means you have different numerical symbols representing higher and higher powers of 10. Those are placed side by side, and to get the number they represent, their values have to be added. In the later hieratic numeral, as found in the Rind papyrus, this basic principle is essentially the same. Such a system does not require zero. But larger the number, you require more and more symbols to represent it. Later on, Egyptians sometimes used a particular hieroglyph, NFR, which means beautiful, to indicate the fixation level of the base of the pyramid, to save its burial chamber from the recurrent inundation of the Nile. The height and the depth of the pyramid were then decided in two opposite directions, in cubits. Some scholars want to see this as a budding number line-like concept, with NFR playing the role of zero in it. But of course, it is a minority view, as the Egyptians never used this NFR as a number in its own right. Around 400 long years before Christ came along, zero had made its presence felt in the mind of Babylon. But besides being in the medial position, could it appear alone? No. It filled a gap between numbers, as we have now known. Babylonians, they used a three-sided stylus to incise on a wet lump of clay two particular marks for 1 and 10. They had a sexagesimal, that is a base 60 place value system. But their numbers from 1 to 59 were represented by additive principle made with those two basic symbols. For over 1,000 years, there was no zero in this system. To represent the absence of a digit in the median place of a number, they used to leave a gap at that position. Naturally, that created a lot of confusion. From around the Seleucid period, they started using a particular double-wedged shape to denote the number zero, a placeholder zero. This symbol is considered as the oldest known written symbol of the placeholder zero in human civilization. But they failed to conceptualize this zero
into a full number in its own right. This has been categorically shown with examples by Ifrah in his famous book, The Universal History of Numbers. There's example aplenty on Mesopotamian earthen plates. Zeros engraved there are gap fillers, a fact which indicates that the Babylonian zero was a number in an unavoidable plight in status much below the Indian zero, a number in its own right. Mayans from the Yucatan Peninsula, they used number 0 in their base 20, that is vigesimal system, using only a dash and a dot, a rare economy of symbols indeed. Their 0 was not a mere placeholder. Indeed, it was a pure number in its own right. They had at least 8 different glyphs to represent their 0. For example, a tattooed man with necklace and the head thrown back, or a seashell, usually colored red, the most common symbol used by the Mayans. They developed some very advanced calendar. Their civil calendar, called Hub, that had 18 months of 20 days each, and then an additional month of 5 days. Interestingly, the first day of every month was reckoned as the day 0. But in their long count calendar, while trying to keep the number of days in a year as close to 365 as possible, they had destroyed the pattern of the base 20 system by putting 18 into 20 in the third place instead of 20 into 20 as it should have been in a proper vigesimal system. This caused a serious drawback in their computational aspect of 0. The Mayan long count number 100 became equivalent to the decimal 360 rather than 400 as it should have been in a correct base 20 system. Hence, in spite of a bold and ingenious presence of 0 as a counting number, nowhere else seen in any other ancient civilization, still, for this deficiency, Mayan 0 cannot be considered as the true predecessor of our modern 0. The Inca Empire was plundered and destroyed by the gold-hungry Spanish conquistadors. But before that, they ruled Peru with a brilliant efficiency. Rigorous record-keeping of the taxes received was done through multicolored knotted strings called quipu. It was a decimal plus value representation of numbers by means of 3 different kinds of knots. A 0 in the sense of absence of a knot in the requisite position of the particular place of the string can be seen. Clearly, it was a primitive placeholder avatar of the zero. They did not have a known system of writing, so there was no need for an independent number zero in their system, nor was there any natural scope of evolution of any such possible relevant symbol. For every branch of human knowledge, Europe owes a lot to Greece, the home of Euclid, Pythagoras, and of course, Archimedes. Greece. Many scholars consider Greece as the cradle of our modern civilization. But this civilization, their numerical system was alphabetic. It was not a positional system, additive in principle. They used their alphabets like this well-known alpha, beta, gamma, etc. to represent their numeral symbols as well. The difference is, for a number to be represented by these symbols, they used to put a bar on top of it. Like here you see 241 is being represented by 3 symbols. Their values are being added, 240 and 1. And there is no need for zero in such a system. But for a long time, they could represent the largest number by this system as a myriori, only 10,000. And you see here, letter Omicron is a Greek word, odin. It means nothing. And it begins with this letter Omicron, which resembles our modern day zero. But as you can see here, in this alphabetic system, Omicron used to stand for 70. The Greeks had a penchant for geometry. Their numbers were geometrical in shape. Every number had one or more than one shapes. It's called number-shape duality. Just like here you see, some numbers are squares, rectangulars, pentagonals, and so on and on. And that led to the confusion about zero. If zero stands for nothing, then what shape can nothing have? How can nothing be represented by something? And with these philosophical conundrums, the Greeks, the natural inheritors of the Babylonian place value system with zero, they decidedly, consciously shunned zero as a numeral. And this is due to, philosophically, the Aristotelian doctrine that preached that nature hates vacuum. There is no zero, there is no infinity. Aristotelian version of universe was a finite nutshell universe. And also, this idea of zero, if accepted as a number, it messed up with the neat Pythagorean doctrine of ratio and harmonics, and hence it could not be tolerated. In a Greek text of 100 AD, we find nothing and nothing added together make nothing. But alas, in the same text, within a few more pages, the author declares, one is the beginning of the numbers. In a later French edition of Ptolemy's Almagest, there is a embellished Omicron-like symbol denoting placeholder zero. This is usually referred to as the Hellenistic zero in the literature. But it was not used alone as a number in its own right. Philosophically, zero in ancient Greece was considered to be an evil idea. Aristotelian doctrine was then to be followed in Europe for about 2000 years as church embraced this doctrine. Contesting Aristotle thus became tantamount to challenging the authority of church in Europe. And in medieval Europe, this could easily have cost one's life. It is said that most of the great discoveries and inventions of which Europe is so proud would have been impossible without a developed system of mathematics. And that in turn would have been impossible had Europe been shackled with the unwieldy system of Roman numerals. Romans were more concerned with soldiering and politicking. Mathematics was not considered worthy of a noble Roman to pursue. Great Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier. Hypatia tortured to death by Roman mob. Their clumsy enumeration system was additive in principle and also subtractive sometimes. There was no zero in it. That made even an ordinary arithmetic calculation in abacus to be a specialist job. To fix the year of birth of Jesus Christ, the Roman monks fused the 354 days Jewish calendar with the 365-day Roman calendar. But as they were unaware of the number 0, they put 1 BC directly before 1 AD, skipping over the year 0, thereby causing ever since the millennium problem. Along the banks of Yolo River prospered a great civilization, which grew gloriously forever and ever with its unique orientation. China had advanced in commerce with the furthest nook of the world. Nevertheless, they didn't have a 0, as their history has unfurled. The construction of all Chinese numbers did mostly depend upon adding and multiplying of them, and arguments strongly drawn. They resorted to decimal system with all accompanying thrills, but the absence of 0 reduced it to a Ferrari without the wheels. To write 22, what would a Chinese gentleman do? He would insert a sign of 10 just between the two twos. Pieces of small green bamboo sticks as rod numerals were kept. They implied rising powers of 10 in columns from right to left. You can surely Google it later. For now, just think of 506. Place 5 rods and 6 rods apart and give a gap inserted betwixt. This gap would then be called a Kong. You please be attentive here. Kong stood for just any number of gaps. Isn't it a bit unfair? Indian Buddhist monks reached China 1200 years ago to help them chance upon their Hindu 0. Learn it duly and follow. Shunya in Arabic was shifra, and in French was chiffre. But what's really in a name? In Fibonacci's Livere Bacchi, written in Latin, Zephyram it became. Zephyram got changed to Venetian Zefiro and then to zero as it's now. Thus, the West begot their zero from India through events that helped somehow. It is generally accepted that the peerless concept of decimal place value system in tandem with zero evolved in ancient India. Initially, during its early period of oral tradition, the concept of void was philosophically nurtured and analyzed by several different schools of thought. Eventually, at some point of time, the concept reflected in the Sanskrit word shunya was transformed into a numeral for mathematical expression of nothing. At a later period, it bloomed in its full potential as a number kho in its own right, an integer on which mathematical operations can be done. Indeed, this unique feature makes kho, the Indian zero, as the true progenitor of our modern mathematical zero. Indian seers from every school seem to have toyed philosophically with the concept of vacuum and nothingness, and they embraced the idea, unlike Greek scholars. In the Tantra, one finds the eternal divine creator Nishkala Shiva, undifferentiated formless God Shiva, who creates this universe from void and destroys it into void again and again. Nashadiya Shukta of the Rig Veda. Nasadasinna sadasit tadanim, nasid raja na voma paravyat. It portrays the vacuity before the creation. Shunyavad, Mahajan Buddhism doctrine of devoidness. It preaches about emancipation, nirvana, as the perception of everything phenomenal as shunya, the void. It appears very likely that the thread of rich philosophical and socio-academic ambience of Indian antiquity was quite pregnant with the immensity of the concept of shunya, a dichotomy as well as a simultaneity between nothing and everything, the zero of void and that of purna, an all-pervading, fathomless, infinite. However, the exact time frame of this gradual evolution of a concept into a number is still hotly debated. One recent controversy in this direction is the suggested 3rd century dating of the famous Bakshali manuscript by the Bodleian C14 test. This birch bark manuscript is replete with amazing calculations in decimal system with bold dots, the initial written form of Indian zero. A 7th century stone inscription of this symbol can be found in Cambodia, a place that was under religious influence of India at that point of time. At Gwalior Fort in India, one can find a 9th century stone inscription of Mihir Bhoja, where you can see a modern zero engraved in Nagari numeral. There are few others of earlier period engraved in stone or in copper plates, but experts do debate their authenticity. Oral enumeration system does not require zero in it. In Rig Veda, number names in Sanskrit are decimal in principle, but there is no zero in it. Placeholder zero was needed when India started writing in decimal system. Before that, neither in Brahmi nor in Kharosthi you find the number zero. Those were additive systems. A mere slavish replacement of the Sanskrit number names by symbols. Way back in around 5th century BC, a grammatical ancestor of zero, in the sense of vanishing, called lopaha, is found in the Ashtadhyayi of Panini. In 2nd century BC text of Prosody by Pingala, the Pingala Chanda Sutram, there are explicit mention of zero as shunya in a calculation which leads to a combinatorial algorithm. Much later, in 5th century AD, we find Aryabhata enunciating the decimal principle of place value system in writing. Brahmagupta in 7th century stated the principle of operation with the number zero and on the number zero. Dhanayor dhanam, rinam rinayor, dhana rinayor antaram, shamaike khom. It states that when a number is added to its negative, it gives zero as an outcome. A clear assertion of the numberhood was thus bestowed on zero. Is zero only the nothingness forever so present with us? It's boundless too that our rishis felt, the ananta, the infinitas, a singularity containing the entire creation before the elemental spark, the brightest light of our consciousness and the darkest of the dark. It has no beginning, this shunya, and in a sense, it doesn't have an end, open only to our perception. Its disposition is cryptically explained in the Nashadiya Shukta of the Rig Veda, serving as a lighthouse on the shore, on the ocean of the wisdom, to all our naive navigators, now, after, or before. Around 770 AD, the Indian decimal system, along with zero, reached the court of second Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur at Baghdad through a Siddhanta text, most likely the Brahmasfuta Siddhanta of Brahmagupta, which was translated by Al-Fazari as Ziz al-Sindh Hind. Around 50 years later, in the court of Al-Mamun, Al-Khwarizmi translated this book with some original work. That Arabic text is lost, but one later Latin translation by Adelard of Bath by the name De Numerendoram is extant. Later, Al-Khwarizmi wrote that famous book, Al-Jabar wal-Muqabala, in which he translated the Sanskrit term shunya as sifr, a mere nothing. The book was introduced in Europe by its Latin translation in 12th century and eventually got spread throughout the world. Today, these numbers, the decimal numbers along with zero, are recognized worldwide as the Hindu-Arabic numerals. Zero, rejected by the charge, kept getting back to use for commercial needs. It wasn't easy to ignore the trend, and serendipity did give a few leads. Working with mercury filled in a tube, Torricelli came up with a steady vacuum to show that nothing could rightly exist, defying Aristotle's shallow dictum. Descartes put zero at the center of his plan, and geometry acquired algebraic wings. Zero was an idea whose time had come, a permanent conceptual leap to bring. From Arab's exposure to Shunya, to the decimal subjugation of pre-modern Europe, it was a wait exceeding 500 years, with deadening stops and abiding hope. Historical reconstruction of mathematical knowledge of ancient period is much like arranging pieces of an enormous jigsaw puzzle. Unfortunately, some of the pieces of which have gone missing. There are historians of mathematics all over the world who are trying to arrange the pieces, of course, according to their own stance, so as to make a pattern out of it. And the job is anything but easy. Often, the preconceived ideas come in the way of scholarly acumen. But of course, there are people who are trying to analyze the available piece of information and even lack of information with an obvious intention to try and make a pattern out of it. With every new piece being found occasionally, it destroys the existing pattern, and the journey continues. Where have the rest of evidences gone? Will our search ever find anything new? These questions you have inherited now, and the history of zero continues with you. History of zero continues with you.
Congratulations, Partha, on the stunning production. We know how much time and effort went into not only the documentary, but also the bilingual panel exhibition, and all in record time, from conceptualization to installation to the film production. Now, for first impressions, please, if Marina, would you care to go first, please?
Okay. So first, thank you. I really loved this film. It was amazing food for thought. So I have more questions than comments. First, well, one small comment, but as a European and hearing European history and everything from a European point of view, this year zero was discovered. It's very interesting to suddenly hear European history as a side thing, as a Europe as a periphery. So that was really interesting. And so I have a few questions. First about the Bakhshali manuscript, because in the Cambodian stele, the zero is actually in a year, so it's more a placeholder. So what in what context does 0 appear in the Bakhshali manuscript?
Well, may I, Peter?
Yes,
Please,
please. Yeah.
please.
Okay, as far as my understanding of Bakhshali manuscript is concerned, as far as I have gone through the calculations shown there, the sutras and the examples, the sums that were solved as available in Bakhshali, it appears to me that these 0 that you see there, plenty of them, they cannot simply be placeholder zeros. The huge arithmetic computation that is present in Bakhshali, the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, taking square roots, approximation of square roots, all kinds of calculations. Unless you are aware of dealing with 0 as a numeral, as a number in its own right, the rules of that with 0. See, if you just want to add a number with another and the 0 is a gap or a symbol, perhaps you can manage it. But when you are multiplying, as far as I understand, when you are multiplying a number by another number and there are few zeros in the number themselves, and you don't know how to manipulate what is the idea of 0 into something, then it is absolutely not possible to calculate. And the calculations in Bakhshali, I hope you are aware of the fact that those numbers, they are like, 26 digit, 34 digit numbers, large numbers in the numerator and denominator, large fractions that are being dealt with in a regular basis. So it seems to me that here we should consider the 0 there. It's not just a placeholder. The Bakhshali people, when they are writing it, and that itself is a big question, as we all know, what is the exact time frame of Bakhshali, and even then, whether this particular manuscript is the original manuscript or it is just a copy of the original one. Because the colophon of Bakhshali, it says one Chajaka Putra, the son of some Chajaka who represents himself as a prince of the calculator. He says that in a Sanskrit word he is using, it is likhitam. Those who know Sanskrit, they tell that if you create something yourself, the corresponding Sanskrit is birochitam or kritam. Likhitam is transcription. So very likely that this version of Bakhshali manuscript that we have now with the Bodleian people, this is a transcription of an earlier document. And this transcription has been made several times again and again, because it was a kind of, as the colophon suggests, it was a kind of family treasure of a particular family. The colophon says that. So at a certain point of time, 1 or 2 pages were worn out, and then it was replaced by corresponding, somebody who just, mimicked the way of writing and all these things. That's how it is possible to have several different pages. They are carbon dating at several point of time. So as far as your question is concerned, and my understanding of Bakhshali mathematics is concerned, I would go for not just placeholder, but this is a functional 0, where arithmetic of 0 is clearly understood.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I make 2 more quick comments?
Please.
So one is about the negative numbers. So you show how in India negative numbers were really ancient. And then you showed a grid of Descartes, where it's actually only the first quadrant. And this is because Descartes actually knew and used negative numbers, but they were still not bona fide numbers for him. There were still numbers, more calculation tools, but not real legitimate numbers. So it's very interesting to see the sort of discrepancy between BC India and 17th century France. And the last comment, when you showed the Inca, how the Inca computed taxes in the Peru taxes, I sort of fell from my chair, because these are knots, and in mathematics there's a knot theory, and there's a classification of the simplest knot, and it's exactly the beginning is exactly what you showed. The first non-trivial knot is the trefoil, and the next one with 4 crossings, the figure 8 knot. So this is really intriguing. So thank you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Marina. Victor, please. You have the first comment.
No, must say I found it very very interesting and engaging to watch. It's very well done. I think it's for general purposes. Certainly, I think people would find it very informative. I have some slight comments. For instance, I'm actually always a bit puzzled. It's said that it was Aristotle who allegedly would have stated that nothing is vacuum in the cosmos, or that the concept of nothing is rejected. From what I know from pre-Socratic philosophers, that is Parmenides, which is a philosopher about half a century, or maybe even more than half a century before Plato, some 500 BC, wrote a philosophical poem in which he argues that whatever is observed or noticed is in fact a being, a non-being, or he calls it meden or uden or tomeion, does not exist, and that seems to be perhaps the concept of zero. But there were philosophers like the third of the earliest philosophers who had called the cosmos to apeiron, that which is unbounded. So I'm not entirely convinced that we could so easily say that all the Greeks never believed in anything like a vacuum. That would be my submission here. That but still, that probably, I mean, it's possible that, of course, the early Christian theology, or the early medieval theology, which regarded Aristotle and Plato, especially Aristotle, as a kind of foundation, philosophical foundation, must have, of course, promoted these ideas of the horror vacui. But I'm not entirely convinced that this was all over all the Greek world or the Hellenistic world, as far as I have some knowledge of Greek philosophy. Then you mentioned Hypatia. Hypatia was actually, she was killed by Christians, if you want to know, in Alexandria. Probably by a very fanatic group of Christians who didn't like her because she's a woman or whatever. And maybe she was of upper caste and they were of lower caste, something like that. It seems to be the reason. But anyway, that's. I think I should leave it at this. In short, I'm not entirely convinced that the Greeks didn't have any idea of infinite or infinity, because the concept of apeiron does exist, in fact.
But Victor, if I may interrupt here, it is an issue which will be addressed also in the monograph. Mm-hmm. And I think what Partha was saying, I don't want to speak for him, but in general terms, what we're seeing here is that there's always a majority mainstream view which will carry the day, and then there's always on the periphery those rebels, who suggest that there may be a heliotropic system, that the sun does not revolve around the Earth, but the Earth revolves around the sun. Aristarchus and Democritus, who suggested that there had to be a vacuum and a particle to be able to have motion. So those minority views were always there, but they did not carry the day. And the point is, again, that it was picked up and projected in later Europe.
I think that probably would be the point. The older ideas were a bit put aside, and they focused on a few canonical philosophers who had become canonical by that time.
And also because it was convenient to their purpose. That's the
very likely, the
ideology they wanted to pursue.
No, I mean, it's definitely true that in the Indian concepts of infinity of space, for instance, is mind-boggling. There's nothing like that, as far as I know, in Greek mythology or in Greek philosophy. Also, the sizes of the cosmos, according to Buddhist texts, is infinite, larger than what is probably even astronomically accepted these days. That concept is there, that I have to say. Yeah.
And we're going to get into that as well, because next week, or the week after next, we'll have a giant philosopher also who will talk about the giant conception of the universe, which indeed is mind-boggling. And for Marina's information, in case you hadn't run across it, they have 5 categories of infinity.
Infinity, yes, yes.
Very, very early on. There too, it took about 2,000 years for others to catch on. But that not because they were looking at it mathematically per se, they did calculations, but because they wanted to it fit into their own idea of the cosmos, which set them calculating. But the ideology was there. Okay, enough of that. Partha, you should get equal time to respond to the 2 panelists and their initial impressions, and then we'll move on. Partha, please.
Well, as far as the point raised by Victor, the idea of the fact of Parmenides, who was an Eleatic school of thought, it was there. And I actually want to resonate with Peter, that the idea, first of all, here in the film was is a terrible time constraint, just to mention the most important one. Of course, there were views. Of course, there were atomism, the atomist school who talked about vacuum and the atoms moving in the vacuum. Of course, this Parmenides that led to the Zeno's paradox, and Aristotle and others, they tried to, in vain to go against what Zeno proposed, that the motion itself is impossible. All those stories there. And as Peter has pointed out, I just wanted to point out the one that was, Aristotle had definitely much more impact on Greek society as a philosopher than Parmenides. And as it turned out that ultimately at a later point of time, Church embraced his ideas, these doctrines. And that is how I just, restrained myself in making that particular comment, which actually, paved the way, shaped the way of this Greek judgment in general towards the idea of zero and infinity. But of course, the exceptions, if you have noted, I have tried to point that out too. Those, documents of Ptolemaic Almagest, the French edition of that, where you have this embellished Omicron, where you have the other one by one Aristarchus, where you have this idea of nothing and nothing is added, and that gives you nothing. But unfortunately, in page 237, I found that he mentions that 1 is the first number. It begins with 1. So that it actually destroys the idea of having 0 with 0 added and giving 0. That turns out to be a mere statement of English language, that nothing with nothing makes nothing. But it is not being transpired into a mathematical equation of 0 plus 0 equal to 0. If you simultaneously claim that 1 is the beginning of the numbers. So what I tried, and what I actually told in the beginning, is to present the state of affairs with all the civilizations, their claims and counterclaims. This purpose of this documentary is to showcase that, not to finally give a judgment. No way at all, right? So the whole purpose of this exercise, this Zero Project, is to discuss things. I think this documentary is a kind of general knowledge that is to be disseminated to the people at large who are not very aware of this whole this story of zero and what is the debate all about. So what I thought is more of a kind of popularization of this whole exercise, so that it can reach the masses and make them aware of such a doctrine, such a study that is still being made, that this idea of genesis of zero is still a vibrant and a living idea. And there are so many people involved. They are having so many different ways and views, and there are not everybody in unison in the unique way of looking at it. So that's basically the purpose of this Zero Gallery and the documentary on it. That's it.
Thank you, Partha. Thank you very much. I think we'll leave it at this. We can go on forever, but In fact, we will go on forever, or at least for many, many more weeks, because there are so many aspects to this. So we're not going to conclude anything, as Parth says, and as we also assert all along. We're going to listen to all the experts, then take a survey, and then also debate some of these issues specifically. So far, we're just doing the presentations and the discussion. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, also the viewing audience. And please tune in the week after next to explore, related issues to try to pinpoint, if possible, zero's epicenter, because that is, of course, the aim. And as Partha says, the journey now continues with you. So thanks again. Until next week, when we meet Professor Alexis Lavie, Philosophy and Cross-Cultural Studies at Renmin University in Beijing, China, on the possible link between the invention of zero and the contemporaneous philosophy of emptiness. Thank you.